My brother Jason and I had always dreamed of living near the mountains, so when we moved to Colorado, a few years back, we decided to split the rent on a townhouse just outside Denver. The location was perfect, only a short drive from endless hiking and camping trails. The only downside? These trails were always packed with people. Locals, tourists, and outdoor enthusiasts crowded them year-round, making it nearly impossible to find real solitude. That's why Jason and I planned a 3-day backpacking trip, venturing deeper into the wilderness, hoping for some peace and quiet. Jason mapped out the route, and when the day finally came, we packed up and drove to the trailhead. There was only one other car in the parking area, a dusty, old SUV that looked like it had been through rough terrain. The thought of another hiker out there didn't bother us. In fact, we welcomed the idea of having the trail mostly to ourselves. The first day was challenging but rewarding. We hiked about 8 miles, most of it on relatively flat terrain, until the final stretch, where we ascended a rugged mountainside. It was exhausting, but Jason assured me the campsite would be worth it. He wasn't wrong. 3/4 up the mountain, we found a small, flat clearing along the edge of a cliff, offering a breathtaking view of the valley below. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, the scene was almost surreal. After setting up camp, we gathered some sticks and stones to build a fire pit. We spent hours sitting by the flames, chatting and enjoying the crisp mountain air. Then we heard it, footsteps crunching along the trail. We immediately fell silent, listening as the footsteps drew closer. Within moments, a man emerged from the darkness, stepping into the flickering firelight. Something about him felt off. He wasn't wearing a headlamp, a must-have for any serious hiker traveling at night. His clothes were disheveled, and yet he had this unsettling grin plastered on his face. Jason was the first to speak. "Hey, do you need something?" he asked, standing up. The man glanced at Jason, then at me, his grin never faltering. "I'm a park ranger," he said. "You two aren't supposed to be here. This section is closed for the season." That didn't make sense. We knew the park was open. In fact, we had obtained camping permits from the state just the day before. Besides, no ranger would be patrolling a remote mountain trail this late at night. Something was wrong. Jason and I exchanged a look, silently confirming we were on the same page. We started asking questions, but the man cut us off abruptly. "You need to leave. Now. Pack up your things and follow me. I'll take you back to the trailhead." His tone was firm, but his expression never changed. That eerie grin remained. Jason stood his ground. "No," he said flatly. "We're staying." For a moment, the man just stared at us. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back into the darkness, disappearing as suddenly as he had appeared. We didn't speak for several minutes after that. We just sat there, listening, waiting to see if he would return. The fire crackled softly, the only sound breaking the heavy silence. Every now and then, we thought we heard distant footsteps, but we never saw him again. Neither of us slept that night. As soon as the sun rose, we packed up and retraced our steps, cutting our trip short. When we reached the parking lot, that same dusty SUV was still sitting there. A disturbing thought crossed our minds. Had the other hiker run into the same man? And if so, what had happened to them? We reported the encounter to the police, but nothing ever came of it. The man had clearly lied about being a ranger, and the fact that he tried to lead us away in the middle of the night suggested something far more sinister. What he had planned for us, we'll never know. But someone else might have found out the hard way. Back in college, my friends and I were avid campers, always finding time for weekend trips into the wilderness. But after graduation, our schedules never aligned. Eventually, I started going solo. One weekend, I decided to revisit an old camping ground we used to frequent. It was remote, a bit difficult to get to, but that's exactly why I liked it. Most people opted for easier spots, meaning I could have the place to myself. The hike-in was familiar, and I reached the site without a hitch. I set up my tent, got everything organized, and started settling in. That's when I noticed someone else arriving. It was a man, dressed like any other hiker, but something felt off. He carried only a small backpack, no tent, no camping gear, nothing that suggested he planned to stay the night. And yet, he didn't seem to be passing through. At first, I brushed it off. Maybe he just wanted some solitude like I did. He lingered on the other side of the campground, and we didn't interact. As the afternoon wore on, I eventually saw him leave. It struck me as odd. He was heading out late, with barely an hour of daylight left, and the hike back was a solid 3 hours. But I didn't dwell on it. With the area to myself again, I started preparing dinner. I'd boiled some water on my small stove, made a freeze-dried meal, and sat near my tent, enjoying the stillness. As the last light faded from the sky, I hung a lantern on my tent and sat outside for a while, just soaking in the atmosphere. That's when the feeling hit me. I was alone. Completely alone. No laughter, no campfire conversations, just silence. After a while, I turned off my lantern and crawled into my tent, zipping it shut and settling in for the night. Sometime later, I woke up. At first, I wasn't sure why. The air was still, the night quiet, and then I heard it. Footsteps. They were slow, deliberate, crunching against the dirt and dry leaves just beyond my tent. My heart pounded as I lay still, listening. The footsteps stopped. Swallowing hard, I reached for my lantern, fumbling to turn it on. The moment the light flickered to life, I unzipped the tent and peeked out. And there he was. The man from earlier. He stood about 20 feet away, in the exact spot I had last seen him before he left. He wasn't moving. Just standing there. Watching. I called out. "Hey, you okay?" No response. He didn't flinch, didn't acknowledge me at all. I couldn't tell which direction he was facing, but he was either staring at me or looking just beyond me. And somehow, both possibilities felt equally disturbing. My hand found the pocket knife in my bag, gripping it tightly as I sat there, heart hammering in my chest. I didn't know what to do. Confront him? Stay silent? Pretend to sleep? Minutes passed, agonizingly slow. The man barely moved. Then, without a word, he turned and walked away. As he moved, I could finally see the angle of his body. He had been staring at me the entire time. I didn't sleep after that. I stayed awake, knife in hand, waiting to hear if he would return. He never did. At first light, I packed up and left, hiking out as fast as I could. I made it back safely, but that trip changed something for me. I haven't gone camping since. I don't know what that man wanted. But the idea of waking up that night and seeing him still standing there, staring at me or worse, never waking up at all, I can't shake it. I had been camping alone, in the backcountry near my hometown, something I did often. I wasn't an experienced hiker, so I never ventured too far, maybe a mile or two from the trailhead at most. This particular trip had been peaceful. My campsite was set up by a lake, and I planned to stay for a few more nights. On the third day, I decided to hike back to my truck, grab some extra food and my fishing rod, and head back to camp. When I returned, something was different. Another tent had appeared near the lake. I hadn't seen anyone on the only trail leading in, but I figured maybe there was another way in that I didn't know about. Either way, I didn't think much of it. I set up my fishing rod and spent the next few hours casting lines into the lake. Every so often, I glanced over at the new tent, but I never saw anyone near it. It was just sitting there, untouched. As the sun dipped lower, I packed up my gear and returned to my own campsite. I ate dinner, gathered firewood, and waited until dark to light my fire. That's when I saw it. A shadow. Just beyond the fire's glow, I caught the briefest glimpse of movement. A figure in the trees. I told myself it was the other camper, probably gathering wood, but something felt off. Why were they so close to my sight? And why did they disappear the moment I noticed them? I tried to shake the feeling and focused on the fire. The warmth, the light, the sound of crackling wood. It was comforting. Then movement again. Not just one figure, four. They emerged from the tree line, walking directly toward me. I tensed, my mind racing. Maybe they were a group of hikers passing through? Maybe they needed help? But as they stepped into the firelight, I saw their faces. Expressionless. Cold. They didn't speak. They just kept walking, straight for me. My instincts screamed at me to move, to do something. But before I could react, two of them veered behind me, heading straight for my tent. The other two stepped closer, forcing me backward. I tried to ask them what they wanted, but they ignored me. Then, without warning, the two men by my tent started rummaging through my things. Panic surged through me. The other two continued pushing me, further from the fire, deeper into the darkness. My breathing quickened. My mind raced. They weren't just here to rob me. They were leading me away. I had no time to think. The second one of them reached into his pocket, I bolted. I didn't look back. I just ran. Branches whipped against my arms as I sprinted through the dark, my feet barely finding the trail. I ran straight to my truck, threw myself inside, and locked the doors. I waited. Nothing. The forest remained eerily silent. The next morning, I reported it to the police. They found no sign of the men, no trace of my stolen gear, nothing. But I knew exactly what they had planned for me. And I knew just how close I had come to never making it out of that forest.